Anyway, so
Hi.
hi, I'm Courtney. For those who are watching, I'm talking to the wonderful and lovely Paulette Vincent-Ruz. But yeah, anyway, the reason why I wanted to reach out and talk to you was I had come across you on Twitter talking about, the work you're doing around chemical education research. And kind of the first question now that I have you one I wanted to ask is, how would you define science identity and how does it show up in the classroom?
That is such a hard question, because if you had asked me this 2 or 3 years ago, I would have said, like, science identity is this magical thing, right? That we could tap into it, and we could like put it in a bottle and mass produce it and give it to kids to drink at school. Almost like, I know this sounds really weird, but like, we could just do that, right? All our problems would be solved because people will believe they can do science, they will love science, they will be great at science, right? But now that we're thinking about it, like, I think when you're a teacher, when you're in front of students, no matter the age, right? Then the question becomes, what behaviors do I want them to have that will make them good scientists? But what behaviors I know are perpetuating certain ideas that are fake, right? And so, like, if you're a marginalized professor that like scientists are not like this, that is just like a stereotypical idea that is not real, you will be better at discerning, right? These are things we want to keep, these are things that we don't want to keep. And this all just saying, the concept of science identity has become massively overcomplicated recently, right? Because now we're trying to say, we want this to be an essential part of you. Without you, stop being the other parts of you that make you you. And by that, I mean, how can you be a scientist and queer and Black and disabled and etc., right?
Yeah.
What does it mean to have this identity without it stifling almost all the other parts of you? And that is, I don't think we even know the answer to that. But that is where we are. I wish I could give you but what I want people hearing this to know, right? If you're thinking about critical pedagogy, right? When you're trying to make your students behave like scientists, what I want you to do is to reflect on that, right? Yeah. When am I asking my student to sacrifice something in order to live up to this expectation that we came up with about who is a scientist, right? That is what I want people to think, right? Because that is what we're asking a lot right now, this sacrifice of everything else, right? And that is what we want to stop.
It's also kind of, and it's a thing that's been on my mind recently of like, we're picking this job, right, as profession and making it part of our identity. And I know that there's like a pride in like saying I am a scientist, and if you took science away from me, I would no longer be who I am. But it's also kind of like, that's your job. Maybe you should.
I don't no. That's my dad is an accountant. I'm pretty sure he's happy at his job, but I don't think he would tell you, like, if you take accounting from him, he would be like devastated and he would stop being the person he is, right? Like, we artists, scientists is this sort of like identity things that we have. I don't know if it's a collective illusion that it should be like you're everything. I think it's a useful concept to think about certain things, but I think we need to start expanding it about how it's not an only thing, right? It's not only this identity. It's like we have all this, we collect multitudes, right? So it's just one of those multitudes.
And it always feels like it's always there, even when you're no longer a student in a classroom. But I feel like in that classroom setting, it becomes this, like, especially in college, right, where it's like you have these 4 years to define, 4 to however many, depending, because some people take longer, and that is okay.
And that is totally fine.
But yeah, it's like you got these so many years to figure out who you are, right? It's like when you go to college, that's when you figure out who you really are as a person, what you're going to do, and that's like so much pressure. And it's like, how do you think this shows up, like when a student is sitting in your lecture room versus when they're in a lab environment? Because as somebody who teaches a lab, I'm always thinking about, when you walk in that space, it's designed to be as see-through as possible. Especially now, people really like the fishbowl labs, which I really want to end. But for the people in the classroom, for the people who are learning, who don't have enough necessarily confidence in their ability to do the tasks of scientists, so they're still trying to lean more on the potential. How do you think that plays versus lecture and lab?
I think it's a really interesting question, because in lecture, I think the way it plays out is people make it too much about the grade, because it's the environment we have created, and we have created environments where it's high stakes. And so I think people we have created a place where people think a grade is the definer of whether you are or you're not. And so you may have come in college with an I am, but a B will B. That is how you say it. B will make you feel you're not, right? And some things that we have seen when we look at who drops out, well, of STEM, that's what I mean, not drop out of college, who drops the STEM path, right? Stops taking STEM classes. We have seen that marginalized populations are more sensitive. And by that I mean is that if you're a white male and you get a B, you're more likely to continue. But if you're marginalized, you tend to need A's to continue. And if you start getting B's, you drop. So it's not only about how it plays out. It seems to be that there's this sensitivity thing about like when you're marginalized, right? I feel like your margin of error is not as good.
Yeah, I was gonna say B is not that low, but all of a sudden it's like,
no, but they feel it is, right?
Yeah.
You feel like, because we have seen like women having low confidence in their math skills because they don't score that high in SAT, and they're still scoring in the 90th percentile of SATs, right? It's just not the 95, right? And men, on average, I'm not saying this is a trash thing. I'm just saying like their confidence lasts longer, right? They can like say, oh, this was a test. This doesn't prove anything about who I am. But when you're marginalized and you're feeling like you need to prove yourself at every single point, you do feel a test is like this judgment on you. And so I think that is how it plays in the classroom. When you're in a lab, I think it's really interesting because I think it depends on how labs are structured. We now have this more researchy labs versus there's more book labs.
There's two questions here. Hopefully this first one will be kind of short. So we're talking about this, it's like in a classroom, but if this is only happening in one classroom, what do you think the impact is on students' feelings of science identity?
Part of the idea of the way I think about things in research is that where is your sphere of influence end?
Yeah.
Right. And if we want to make bigger impact, then we need to collect a lot of spheres of influence and like help them work together, right? And I think because of history, like it's just how it's been working, right? We've been treating this sort of like changing the curriculum, changing practices as that like I choose to do it rather than like we're collectively changing things.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and you actually touched on something I wanted to get into. So we've been talking about this and it's like, well, how can instructors impact students' science identity in person and online? But also if we're talking at a larger institution, that interaction is coming from teaching assistants who can be grad students, not grad students, depending on where you are. So kind of, do you have any suggestions on how instructors, either directly or indirectly through TAs, can have a positive influence or just influence? It doesn't have to be positive because some people that might be the moment you're like, you know what, science is not for me. Yeah.
TAs, I think TAs could be great because they already went through it and they can be like, look, I know this seems like the end of the world. I also broke a flask on my first year. I could tell you stories about all the flasks I broke on my first year. Oh. But I think that again, comes back to resources, right? Are you allowed to get your TA sometime 2 weeks before classes, talk to them, sort of give them the lay of the land? This is what we're doing. This is like, right? Can you meet with them every week? And so I want to both say you can do a lot, but also forgive yourself for the things you cannot do. You're a person that if you're teaching, you're likely under-resourced, trying to do your best. And I applaud you for that. But a lot of it needs to be cultural, sadly. I wish the answer could be, you can magically change this. But I think it's been a hurtful idea that we have imposed on instructors and teachers, that they can alone fix this problem. Because of this magical movie, like the movies that show like these teachers that change kids' lives.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Right? Like we have this idea, like you don't need to be that, right? It's a collective job. It's a village.
Is there a way that instructors can consciously assess if they are doing the critical pedagogy work, right? The paying attention to science identity and how they are influencing it?
The thing that I think has had most of the biggest impact is that are people thinking they're successful? Regardless of the grade, regardless, like, are they thinking they're succeeding? And so asking questions regarding of that, like, do you believe you can do this? Do you believe you're being successful? I think are the ones that are like quickest, but also have a greatest impact. So if you have students getting A's, but that they feel they're getting A's out of luck, oh, I did good, like instead of believing they had the skills to get that A, you know what, like that is a huge difference, right? That is one of the things that I think you can impact more, because I feel like you can find ways of reminding students it's not a fluke. You're succeeding correctly. On grading does that, I think, well, that in terms of like giving you a feedback loop of like improvement, but like post our measures on success in students. Let's ask them, how do they feel like they were being successful? Because I think if you feel successful, it will be easier to see yourself as a scientist.
Yeah, but I think you also need someone, at least at the beginning, to tell you this is a sign of success. Like you were saying,
Right.
like, did I do, like, oh, I just got an A because I got lucky and I happen to have a good day, where it's like somebody who's seen as an expert, and I guess that's the benefit of being an instructor. You can say, no, these are signs of success, or these are some signs of success, not the only ones, but
right.
this is not just luck. Like there's something behind that luck, and being able to articulate that well and clearly for students, I think is a.
And I think, yeah, you get stuck. Okay, you got stuck, you got it wrong, but have you developed a way of getting better at a thing? That is a huge measure of success, because it's about where you started and where you're ending, versus assuming everybody's starting, like, should end here, or like comparing yourself to whether somebody does things faster or not, right?
Yeah.
I had somebody, an undergrad, she was really bad at practical work, right? She was like a theoretician, right? Like for her, success was passing lab, right? And she would be delighted when she would pass it, because a lot of our labs were based on whether you would get the thing that,
yeah.
like, yeah. And so for her to do that for her, that was success. She didn't care if it was an A, a B, a C, right? Like,
yeah.
I passed. I'm going to be with a computer in grad school. I don't care. I just want my degree just to get over this and then just spend the time with my computer. Like, that was success for her, right? Because she knew this was not easy on her. Success for me was to get it right all the time, because I wanted to be a bench chemist, right?
Yeah.
Means different.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. So we are coming up on the end of the time. Is there any kind of last parting statement you want to say around, critical pedagogy, critical digital pedagogy?
Specifically for labs, but I think really deeply about that. What does it mean that somebody learned, right? I think that is what it means to be critical. We have skated a lot on the A means they learned. So actually, what does it mean they learned? What does it mean that I'm seeing students learning? What does it mean that students are being successful? Even just, I think, asking you these questions as an instructor is going to change a lot of what you do, right? And then every time you're asking students to do something, ask yourself, is this my idea what a scientist is, or is this necessary to be a scientist, right? And I think that key difference is what would make you more critical, right? Discerning, right, what is our assumptions of versus what actually is necessary. And that is a reflection you can do, and those are changes you can, like, I think can be surprisingly powerful within your sphere of influence.
Yeah.
And when I say all of this, is not to be like, oh, you're gonna do anything. It's actually to forgive yourself of the things you cannot do and just stay with the things you can actually do. That's what I mean. And we in the research are trying to figure out what these guidelines are so you can have them. Right. That is our job.
Oh, please do.
Right. That is what we're trying to, we should come up with, how does this look like differently? And then you can right, like, yes, and I think there should be more partnerships, because if I'm not in the classroom, then what do I know what I'm doing? Right. Like I think there should be more partnerships in terms of like, what are you seeing? What are we seeing? What do you think we need to figure out? What thing you want to find? Okay, I can help you find it, right?
Yeah.
But more communication, I think, is necessary, because if not, we are coming up with ideas about what we think you need. You are not getting what you need, right? So if you have a researcher in your institution that does education, right, and you can partner with them to sort of figure these questions out, it will take some of the overwhelming away, because that is their job, right? To figure the answer to that. Your job is to teach them. So partnerships, I think, are great. That is the thing we should move on to, I think, as a field. This like communication of both things.
Yeah, and I would love to see it. Well, thank you so much for this partnership in this a very short-ish interview. Thank you so much for your time. It's been awesome chatting to you about all this, and I'm looking forward to seeing the conversation that will result in our little crew. And
I'm happy to answer, like, if you get some really specific questions, right, send them to me, and then I'll figure out how to answer them.
Yeah, I'll give you some delays so you have some time to really put together a
Right.
nice.
I'll try
awesome.
to figure out it and send resources, right? Because if I have more specific questions from them as practitioners, right, I can figure out more resources kind of things. Like,
So partnership. You're just
talking. A partnership.
doing the work as opposed to just saying the words. I appreciate it.
All
Thanks, Paulette.
Anytime.